Midnight Echoes.
I was 20 years old, working a dead-end retail job at a department store that was already circling the drain. It was Christmas Eve, 2008. The recession was hitting hard, and the mall was half empty even during the holiday rush. My manager, a guy who hated Christmas more than the Grinch, decided we would stay open until 10 p.m. for last-minute shoppers, even though the rest of the mall closed at 6. By 8 o'clock, the store was a ghost town. The loop of generic Christmas pop music had become a form of psychological torture. My coworker, Sarah, had already bailed, feigning a stomach flu, leaving me alone to man the registers and lock up. Around 8:45, the last few stragglers drifted out. I was just about to walk over and lock the main mall entrance gate when a man walked in. He was dressed as Santa Claus. Not a cheap Party City Santa. This was a high-quality, theatrical suit, thick velvet, real leather boots, and a beard that looked unnervingly genuine. But something was off. The suit was dirty. The white fur trim was stained yellow and brown at the cuffs, like it had been dragged through mud. And he didn't have that jolly, padded look. Underneath the velvet, the man was gaunt. His shoulders were bony and sharp. He didn't look at me. He walked straight past the registers, his boots making a heavy, wet thud-thud-thud on the polished tile floor. He headed towards the back of the store, into the dimly lit children's clothing section. I called out, "Sir, we're closing in 10 minutes." He didn't react. He just kept walking, disappearing behind a rack of winter coats. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I was just a college kid. I wasn't paid enough to confront weirdos. I decided to just stay at the front, page my manager, who was hiding in his office upstairs, and wait for the guy to leave. 10 minutes passed. 9 p.m. The mall lights outside our gate clicked off, plunging the concourse into darkness. Our store was now a brightly lit island in a sea of black. I paged my manager again. No answer. I had to go kick the guy out. I grabbed the store phone, a heavy, outdated landline, just to have something solid in my hand. I walked towards the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The store was dead silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and that damn Christmas music, which was now playing a slow, instrumental version of Silent Night. I reached the children's section. "Sir, the store is closed. You need to leave now." Silence. I walked through the aisles, checking between the racks. Nothing. I checked the fitting rooms. Empty. I felt a wave of relief. He must have slipped out while I was distracted by the register. I turned back towards the front of the store to finally lock the gate. That's when I heard it. Jingle, jingle. It came from the far corner, near the emergency exit that led to the loading bay. It wasn't a loud, cheerful sound. It was faint, metallic, like a single rusty bell moving slightly. I froze. "Hello? Is someone there?" Jingle. I walked slowly toward the corner. It was a dead end, filled with a dense cluster of mannequins dressed in holiday sweaters. They all stared blankly forward, their plastic smiles catching the light. I stepped into the cluster. Looking behind them, there was nobody there. I was starting to feel crazy. Maybe it was the heating vents. Maybe it was a rat. I turned around to head back to the front, and I caught my reflection in a tall, three-way mirror. My blood turned to ice. Standing just outside the reflection of the mirror, positioned perfectly behind a rack of clothes so I couldn't see him directly, was a patch of red velvet. I whipped around. There was nothing there. Just coats. I ran back to the front counter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely punch in the code to close out the register. I didn't care about locking up properly anymore. I just wanted out. I grabbed my keys and my coat. I reached for the switch to kill the main store lights. Click. The store plunged into near darkness. Only the red emergency exit signs cast a bloody glow over the aisles. And then, from the absolute silence of the dark store, a voice spoke. It was deep, raspy, and wet. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Naughty. Panic took over. I bolted for the main gate. I fumbled with the keys, jamming them into the lock to pull down the metal shutter. I looked back over my shoulder into the dark store. He was there. He was standing in the middle of the main aisle, maybe 50 feet away, illuminated faintly by the red exit sign. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring at me. The dirty white beard seemed to glow in the dark. I finally got the gate unlocked and started yanking it down. It was an old, heavy, rolling shutter that made a deafening crash-rattle-crash noise as it came down. As the gate was halfway down, I looked again. He was closer. 20 feet. He hadn't made a sound. He was just there. I slammed the gate to the floor, locked it, and backed away. Through the small diamond-shaped holes in the metal shutter, I could see him. He walked right up to the gate. I could see the dirty white fur trim of his suit pressed against the metal. I could hear his breathing, heavy, congested, rattling breaths. He put a gloved hand on the gate and started to rattle it. Not violently, just a slow, rhythmic clank, clank, clank. I turned and ran through the dark, empty mall concourse, not stopping until I burst out of the employee exit doors and into the cold night air of the parking lot. My car was the only one left under the buzzing sodium vapor light. I sat in my locked car and called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later and searched the store. They found the back emergency door. The one near the mannequins where I first heard the bells was unlocked from the inside. There was a trail of muddy, melting snow leading from that door into the store and back out again. They never found the man. My manager, of course, claimed the alarm system must have malfunctioned and that I was just a hysterical kid spooked by the empty store. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that for about 15 minutes in the dark, I was locked inside with something that was dressed like Santa Claus, but wanted something very different than milk and cookies. I haven't set foot in a mall around Christmas since. 2 years ago, desperate for extra cash for Christmas presents, I took a house-sitting gig over the holidays. It felt like hitting the jackpot. The job was for the Caldwells, an ultra-wealthy couple taking a 2-week cruise. Their house wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling, modern mansion sitting on 20 acres of isolated forest land about an hour outside the city. My job was simple. Feed their 2 prized koi fish, water the exotic plants in the atrium, and basically just exist there to make sure the pipes didn't freeze. For 2 weeks of doing almost nothing in the lap of luxury, the pay was astronomical. I arrived on December 20th. The Caldwells gave me a quick tour, handed me the keys and alarm codes, and left. The first few days were fantastic. I pretended I was rich, watching movies on their massive home theater screen, cooking in a kitchen bigger than my entire apartment, and sleeping in a guest bed that felt like a cloud. Then, on Christmas Eve, the blizzard hit. The forecast called for a few inches, but by 4 p.m., it was a whiteout. The wind howled, rattling the massive floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room. By 6 p.m., the power flickered and died. The backup generator kicked on immediately, fueling emergency lights in the hallways and keeping the heating system running, but the main lights, the TV, and the Wi-Fi were dead. The silence that fell over that huge house was immediate and heavy. Without the hum of the fridge or the furnace fans, you could hear every creak of the settling wood and the muffled roar of the wind outside. I decided to camp out in the living room, near the massive stone fireplace. I got a fire roaring, wrapped myself in blankets, and tried to read a book by flashlight. Around 10 p.m., I heard the first sound. It came from directly above me. Thump. It was muffled but distinct, like a heavy boot taking a single step on a carpeted floor. The master suite was directly above the living room. I froze, my book lowered. I listened for 5 minutes. Nothing. Just the wind. It's an old house settling in the cold, I told myself. Or snow falling off the roof. I went back to reading. 20 minutes later. Thump, thump, creak. 3 distinct steps. Slowly, deliberately, moving across the floor above my head. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was no way that was snow. That was the cadence of a person walking. I sat there for an hour, terrified, clutching a heavy brass fireplace poker. My mind raced. Was it an animal that got in? A burglar who didn't know I was there? Eventually, the silence became worse than the noise. I had to know. I took the poker and my high-powered flashlight. I walked to the grand staircase in the foyer. The emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows up the stairs. I ascended slowly, placing my feet on the edges of the steps to avoid squeaks. The upstairs hallway was a long tunnel of shadow. The door to the master suite was at the far end, slightly ajar. I pushed the door open with the tip of the poker. The room was enormous. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the 4-poster bed, the seating area, the walk-in closet. Empty. I checked under the bed. I checked the massive bathroom. Nothing. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was just paranoid. The storm was playing tricks on my mind. I turned to leave the bedroom. As I swung the flashlight beam across the room one last time, the light caught something on the plush cream-colored carpet near the window. I walked over and knelt down. It was a small puddle of water, melted snow, and right in the center of it was a single dark pine needle. I stared at it, my brain trying to process. I hadn't been upstairs since I arrived. The Caldwells had left 4 days ago. This snow was fresh. Someone had been in this room tonight. And then I realized the horrifying truth. I hadn't heard the intruder break in when the power went out. I heard them walking around hours later, which meant they had been inside the house before the storm even started. They had been here with me, watching, waiting, hiding in one of the dozen empty rooms I never checked. Panic, raw and primal, took over. I didn't care about the blizzard. I didn't care about the money. I bolted downstairs, grabbed my car keys and coat, and ran out the front door. My car was buried in 2 feet of snow. I spent 20 agonizing minutes digging it out with my bare hands and a decorative shovel I found on the porch, constantly looking back at the dark, towering house, expecting to see a face in one of the windows. I finally managed to get the car onto the unplowed driveway. I drove 5 miles an hour, sliding all over the road, until I reached the main highway, which had been plowed. I didn't stop driving until I reached a 24-hour diner 2 towns over. I called the police from the diner. They went out the next morning when the roads were clearer. They found the back terrace door had been forced open. The lock had been melted with some kind of blowtorch, bypassing the alarm sensors. But the most chilling part was what they found in the attic. In a small, unfinished crawlspace tucked behind the insulation, they found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a small peephole drilled through the drywall that looked directly down into the guest bedroom where I had been sleeping for 4 nights. The police said whoever it was had likely been living up there for weeks, maybe even before the Caldwells left, waiting for the house to be empty. Or maybe waiting for someone like me to be alone. I've always been a sucker for internet mysteries and community events. So, back in 2019, when I saw a post on a niche subreddit for a global secret Santa exchange, I signed up without thinking twice. You put in your name, address, and a list of interests, and the system matches you with someone. You send a gift, you get a gift. Simple. My interests were pretty generic: retro video games, craft beer, horror movies. Around December 15th, I got a notification that my gift had shipped. No tracking number, just a message from my anonymous Santa. Coming soon. I hope you like it. I put a lot of thought into it. 2 days later, the first package arrived. It was a small, plain brown cardboard box with no return address, just my name and address scrawled in thick black marker. I opened it on my kitchen counter. Inside was a single VHS tape. No sleeve. Just a black cassette with a white label that read, Halloween '98. I chuckled. Okay, horror movie fan. Nice touch. I didn't even own a VCR, so I just put it on my bookshelf as a cool retro prop. The next day, December 18th, another package appeared. Same plain box, same handwriting. This one contained a t-shirt. It was an old, faded gray shirt from a local brewery in my city, a place I went to almost every Friday night. It wasn't a new shirt you buy online. It was worn, soft, and had a small bleach stain on the hem. It felt weird. Coincidental, maybe? But it gave me an uneasy feeling. It felt less like a gift and more like a personal belonging that had been taken. December 20th. The third package. This one was smaller. Inside was a framed photograph. I pulled it out and my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me. It was taken from a distance through a window. I was sitting on my couch in my living room, playing a video game, wearing the exact hoodie I was wearing right then. The photo was grainy, taken with a high-zoom lens, and it was clearly taken at night. I dropped the frame. The glass shattered on the floor. This wasn't a fun internet exchange anymore. This was stalking. I immediately went to the subreddit to report the user, but the account that matched with me had been deleted. I called the police non-emergency line. They filed a report but told me that without a threat or a return address, there wasn't much they could do except tell me to lock my doors. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. I kept my blinds drawn 24/7. Every time a delivery truck drove by, I flinched. December 23rd. I came home from work to find the fourth package sitting on my doormat. It was a large, heavy box. I didn't want to bring it inside. I nudged it with my foot. It felt solid. Against my better judgment, my curiosity won out. I brought it into the garage and opened it with a box cutter, my hands shaking. Inside was a beautifully wrapped Christmas present, complete with a red bow. I tore off the paper. It was a high-end VCR. Brand new, still in the box. Taped to the top of the VCR box was a note in that same black marker handwriting. Now you can watch the first tape. You need to see the beginning before you see the ending. I felt sick. This person was toying with me. They were watching me, knowing I hadn't watched the tape. I took the VCR and the Halloween '98 tape inside. I hooked it up to my TV, my heart pounding. I shoved the tape in and pressed play. Static filled the screen for a few seconds. Then, Shaky camcorder footage appeared. It was night. The camera was hidden in bushes looking at a house. My house. The date stamp in the corner didn't say 1998. It said December 23rd, 2019.
Today.
The footage showed me arriving home from work just an hour ago. It showed me walking to the door, seeing the package, nudging it with my foot. It showed me looking over my shoulder, terrified, before dragging the box into the garage. The footage ended with the cameraman breathing heavily behind the lens, then whispering in a low, gravelly voice, "See you tomorrow night. Merry Christmas." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, holding the bat, staring at the front door. Christmas Eve came. I didn't leave the house. I was waiting for the final package. Or for him. At 11:55 p.m., just before Christmas Day, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my smart doorbell. Motion detected at front door. I pulled up the app on my phone. The live feed showed my front porch. It was empty. No package. No person. Then the doorbell rang. Ding dong. I watched the screen. Still nobody there. Then I heard it, a gentle tapping on the glass of my living room window, right behind where I was sitting. I haven't participated in an online gift exchange since. I moved apartments 3 months later. I never found out who it was. But every Christmas Eve, I make sure my blinds are closed tight, and I pray I never get another anonymous package. Our family farmhouse is about as secluded as you can get. We're 5 miles down a dirt road that branches off a secondary highway. Our nearest neighbor is a 20-minute drive away. We're surrounded on 3 sides by dense, ancient woods. We always loved the isolation, especially at Christmas. It felt like our own private snow globe. This happened last year, Christmas Eve. It was just my parents, my younger sister Lily, and me. We had finished our traditional Christmas Eve dinner and were sitting in the living room, drinking hot cocoa and listening to old records. The wood stove was crackling, the tree was lit, it was picture-perfect cozy. Outside, it was a bitterly cold, clear night. There was about a foot of old snow on the ground, crusty with ice. Around 9:30 p.m., Lily, who was looking out the front bay window, frowned.
Mom, Dad?
Are you expecting anyone? My dad chuckled. Out here? In this weather? Not a chance. Well, Lily said, her voice losing its certainty, I think there are people at the end of the yard. We all got up and went to the window. My dad turned off the interior lights so we could see out without the reflection. Our front yard is a large clearing that ends about 100 yards from the house, where the thick forest begins. Sure enough, standing right at the tree-line, where the manicured snow met the dark woods, was a group of figures. There were 5 of them. They were dressed in what looked like old-fashioned winter clothing, long dark coats, scarves wrapped up to their noses, tall hats. They were holding what looked like songbooks, and one held an old lantern that cast a weak, flickering orange glow on the snow around them. Carolers? My mom asked, bewildered. How did they get here? I didn't hear a car. Maybe their car broke down on the main road and they walked up? I suggested, though the idea of walking 5 miles in this cold seemed insane. We watched them for a minute. They weren't moving. They weren't singing. They were just standing there in a perfect line, facing the house. The distance was too far to make out their faces. They were just dark blurs under hats. We should invite them in for cocoa so they don't freeze, my mom said, her hospitality overriding her caution. My dad, ever the pragmatist, shook his head. Something's weird. Let's just wait a second. We waited. Another minute passed in silence inside the house. Outside, the figures remained statue still. They hadn't shifted their weight, hadn't turned to each other to talk. They just stared. It was getting uncomfortable. "I'm going to turn on the porch light," my dad said. He flipped the switch by the door. The floodlight momentarily blinded us, illuminating the snow immediately in front of the house. When our eyes adjusted and we looked back at the tree, they were closer. They hadn't walked. We hadn't seen them move. But the group of 5 was now standing about 75 yards away. They had advanced 25 yards in the 2 seconds the light had flashed. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather snake up my spine. "Did you see them move?" I asked. "No," Lily whispered. My dad turned off the porch light, plunging the yard back into darkness, lit only by the moon and their single lantern. We stared, unblinking, for what felt like 5 minutes. They didn't twitch. The lantern flame didn't even seem to flicker in the wind. "Okay, this isn't funny," my dad grumbled. He went to the kitchen to get his high-powered hunting flashlight. While he was gone, Mom went to check the back door lock. I looked away from the window for just a second to glance at Lily, who was shivering. When I looked back out, my breath caught in my throat. They were at the 50-yard mark, halfway to the house. They were moving only when we weren't looking. My dad came back with the flashlight. He shone the powerful beam out the window. It cut through the dark like a lightsaber. The beam hit them. They weren't wearing old-fashioned clothes. They were wearing rags. Tattered, filthy layers of burlap and wool that hung loosely off their frames. And their faces. They weren't wearing scarves. Their skin was gray, like frozen meat. Their eyes were too wide, rimmed with red, staring unblinkingly at the house. Their mouths were open and fixed, impossibly wide grins filled with dark, jagged teeth. They weren't holding songbooks. Their hands were empty, long gray fingers hanging at their sides. And the lantern wasn't a lantern. It was a severed animal head, maybe a deer, impaled on a stick with a lit candle jammed into its open mouth. Lily screamed. My dad dropped the flashlight. "Lock everything," he roared, racing for the gun safe in his room. My mom, sister, and I huddled in the middle of the living room away from the windows. We heard my dad pump a shell into a shotgun in the bedroom. Then we heard the singing. It wasn't caroling. It was a discordant, screeching drone. 5 voices not quite in harmony, singing a melody that sounded vaguely like a warped Christmas hymn, but the words were guttural, unintelligible sounds. Thump. Something hit the front door.
Hard.
The singing got louder, closer. It was surrounding the house now. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Something sharp was being dragged along the siding of the house, moving from the front door toward the living room window where we had been standing. We dropped to the floor, crawling behind the sofa. My dad burst into the room, shotgun raised, aiming at the front door. The scraping stopped right at the big bay window. We held our breath. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire and the wind outside. Then, a single, gray hand slammed flat against the window glass. Then another. Then a face pressed against the pane, its rictus grin smeared against the glass, its dead eyes searching the room. My dad fired a warning shot into the ceiling.
Boom.
The sound was deafening in the small room. The face at the window didn't flinch. It just kept grinning. Then, as suddenly as it started, the hands pulled back from the glass. The singing stopped mid-screech. We heard heavy, crunching footsteps moving away from the house, back toward the woods. We didn't move until dawn. When the sun came up, my dad went outside with a gun. There were footprints all over the porch and right up to the window. They were strange, bare footprints, long and narrow, with claw marks at the tips of the toes. The prince led back to the tree-line and vanished. We drove into town and stayed at a motel for 3 days. We never found out what they were. Local legends talk about the hungry folk who come down from the hills in deep winter, looking for warmth and meat, but that's just folklore, right? We still spend Christmas at the farm. But now we have steel shutters on all the windows and we never, ever look outside after dark on Christmas Eve.